first let's check the state of this project. Let's play it. Right now we have a tower, a generic tower, and when we click, it fires, and we have here the monster spawner that spawns, well, monsters every 0.2 monsters per second. Here's the monster spawner. So within this green line and this red line, this is where the monster spawner spawns monsters. One monster per 5 seconds. Let's focus now on firing a physics-based bullet. If we check the tower script, we have here an empty method called fire, and we are getting the direction of that bullet. So first of all, we need a prefab for the bullet. So head back to Unity. Let's create an empty object. Let's call it a bullet. Let's reset the transform. Let's add a sprite collider. Sorry, a sprite renderer. And then let's use this knob. Let's make it what color? Purple bullet. There. Okay, we now have our bullet. Next, bullet sprite. We add next is we add a collider so that we can detect if it's hitting a monster or not. Let's use a circle collider 2D. Since we're on a 2D project, this applies as well on 3D projects, but instead you'll be using a sphere collider instead of circle collider 2D. Right, in our case, we use circle collider 2D. Okay, and we check this is trigger. Okay, so we just want to detect if it hits a monster. We don't want it to interact with the monster itself, like for example bouncing off the monster. The last thing we need is a bullet script. So let's create a new script called bullet. Drag this script to the inspector so it attaches to the bullet object. This bullet script attaches to the bullet object. Double click this script so we can edit it out. We need to check if this bullet hits something, right? There can be two ways on how to approach this. Okay, either on your monster class you detect if it got hit by a bullet, or if on the bullet class, if this bullet hits a monster. Let's include that logic or implement that logic inside the bullet class or inside the bullet object instead of the monster object. All right, so right here we can type in on trigger enter 2D. Remember, we're using a 2D collider. If you're using it on a 3D project, you should use on trigger enter. Or when this function runs, we check if the other collider, game object, is of tag. This is a string, so it's good practice to use this function instead of using equals equals. So tag that equals, let's name it monster. Okay, so this line here will run whenever we hit a monster. So what we can do here is get that instance of monster. Other that game object that get component monster. There, we now have the instance of that monster that's being hit by this bullet. Next is take damage. We still don't have this method right here, the take damage, but yeah, that's what we're gonna do next. Right, so let's head over to our monster, and on our monster there's only an event that is being called that should be called whenever this monster dies. This doesn't affect the bullet implementation. We create a public function called take damage, and we add bullet as its parameter so we can get the damage of that bullet, just in case we have bullets that have different damages. Well, most likely you'll be designing that kind of game. So here in our bullet, let's create a public variable. Let's make it an int damage. Okay, and then you know what, let's make it neat. So float damage. Okay, so that only the inspector can change the damage of this specific bullet. And then when we call monster that take damage, we are required to enter this as the bullet, and we can create a property float damage and just get the value for damage. So the reason why I did this is I don't want this variable to be modified outside of the inspector. So for example, you might accidentally change the damage from maybe from 1 to 0 from a different class. Like for example, from a monster, you might accidentally call bullet that damage is equals to 0. We don't want that. So to make sure that that won't happen, we make this variable damage as a private, but you need this attribute here, serialized field, so that this variable will be shown in the inspector. And then this next line here is what we call property. So this is just for getting the value. Okay, it's some sort of like a read-only variable. Okay, so let's head back to monster. When we take damage, the damage is right here, bullet.damage. Okay, so we now have the damage right here in this variable, in this local variable, but this monster doesn't have a life yet. So let's create one. Same thing, we don't want our life to be modified by other classes or objects. So private int life or health. To minimize our code, let's not create a local variable for this damage. We can directly access bullet.damage. So health minus equals damage. Okay, I made a mistake. This should be integer. All right. Okay, let's head back to monster. Health minus equals damage, and then let's check if health is less than or equal to 0. So that means this monster dies if it has less than or equals 0 health. Now we call onDead that invoke. All right. This. All right. If you're not familiar with this question mark, it is just a shortcut for checking if this is null or not. So this line is similar to this one. onDead is not equal to null. Then we call dead that invoke this. So that's the same. All right. Actually, we can shortcut. We can even shorten this one by just deleting the invoke. Okay, but we cannot use this question mark without using the function invoke, like this one. onDead question mark this. Oops, this. Right. It will be an error, compile error. So that's why I used invoke. Okay. So basically those are the same thing. Both of them are the same thing, so we just opt for the shorter one. Okay, now we call the dead and we destroy our object. Destroy our game object, and we don't need these two functions because our monster is very dumb. It just stands there waiting to die. Right, let's move on to our bullet on trigger, when this bullet hits a monster, that monster takes damage, and we destroy this bullet. So destroy game object. All right, so that it won't hit another monster behind this recently hit monster. Okay, just in case two monsters are lined up. So we want that bullet to disappear upon hitting a single monster. We now have a complete bullet object right here, and we want to create a prefab of it. So click and drag bullet object to your folder and delete this bullet. Now we head back to our tower object, and we need a reference to that prefab. So private bullet prefab. Okay, we now have our bullet, and then when we fire, we instantiate the bullet. So b instantiate bullet prefab, comma null, no parent, and false. Okay, we now have a bullet, and then okay, I think I made a mistake, but let's move on. We'll just get back to my mistake later on. So for its position, we position it for now, let's position it the same as with our current position, with the tower's position. So transform that position. We need to head back to our bullet script and type in the implementation. We need to implement how this bullet flies. So we need to get the rigid body of this object. One way to do that is just require, if your rigid body is on the same object as this bullet script, we can just use require component and then type of rigid body 2D, remember that, 2D, and then we can create a private variable here, rigid body 2D, our body. Okay, then our body that velocity equals new vector 2. All right, so we need the direction from the tower since we already have this direction. So I think we need to call a single function for the bullet to fly in the right direction. So void fire, something like that, and let's give the direction. Okay, now we have the direction. Let's save it to our member variable vector3 direction. Okay, since we have the same name for the member variable and the argument, we can distinguish them by using this direction. Okay, and now we have our direction. We can use it right here. Okay, we now have our velocity, our direction. That's fine. I think that's it. Let's head back to tower script, and upon instantiating, setting its movement, we can call fire and give the direction. Okay, now the bullet has the correct direction. It should fly using this code. We set the velocity of its rigid body, but right now, let's head back to Unity. We still our bullet doesn't have rigid body. Yeah, it does. Okay, so it's simulated, it's dynamic. All right, no, we should change this to kinematic. The reason why this does have rigid body 2D, even though we didn't add it earlier, it's because of this line right here, this require component. So this means that whenever this script is attached to an object, that object should have this type of component as well. So in this case, whenever an object has bullet script, it should have a rigid body. If it doesn't, Unity will automatically add one. So in this case, there's a rigid body 2D even though we didn't add it earlier. Okay, so body type should be kinematic instead of dynamic. We don't want our bullet to fall due to gravity. Okay, and continuous collision detection, select continuous since this is a bullet. Yep. Okay, let's head back to our main scene or sample scene. Our bullet should be complete. Let's head back to our tower script. Is this complete? Upon firing, we instantiate a bullet. Okay. Alright, so are we missing any? Yeah, right here. We still need to drag this prefab to tower variable bullet prefab so that tower can instantiate, well, bullets. Okay. I'm not sure if we are still missing something, but let's try and run the game. Okay, nothing happened, but we are seeing an error. Okay, let's check. It's our body.velocity. It says that objects not referenced. I think our body is still okay. I forgot to set the value for our body. Okay, let's create the start method, and our body is equals to get component rigid body 2D. Okay, and that's it. Let's try and run the game again. Now we have our bullet flying off to the right direction. If it hits a monster, it doesn't work. It's because of we're not yet finished with the monster. Let's go to the monster object. All right, monster object. It has a view. Okay. The only missing thing here is of course we need to set its health. So let's make it 2. And we need to have a circle collider 2D. It should be a trigger as well. When I spawn right here, let me set the tag to monster. Okay, now we are assured that the new monsters being created, like this one, has a tag of string monster. And if we hit it with a bullet, as you can see, the bullets are getting destroyed, meaning it did hit a monster. We didn't set the damage of the bullet. So basically the bullet is 0 damage. It's hitting the monster. It is hitting the monster, but with the 0 damage. Okay, let's set this to 1 and run the game. I think this should work now. 1 hit, 2 hit, and our first monster dies. Okay, 2 hits. All right. Let's make this thing bigger. Okay. So this is how you implement a physics-based bullet. All right. So in part 2 of this, well, 2-part video, I'm going to show you how to implement a bullet using raycast or using raycasting. That is more applicable for guns, because bullets in a gun is so fast that it's not ideal for physics-based implementation. Okay, so that's it for this video, and this entire project will be uploaded to my Google Drive, and I will share it in the description below so you can compare it with your own project, just in case you get some blocker or you can't move forward from whatever bug you're having. All right, especially in the scripts. If you did learn something from this video, consider liking this video. I do have a website called Game Dev Newbie at gamedevnewbie.com, where I sell online courses. Okay, so see ya on part 2 of this video.